Hello, everybody. Welcome to InBirks podcast. I'm your boy, Zach. And today we are sitting down for the first time professionally, quote unquote, I should say, within the confines of Kitta in Narrabundah. Sitting up on table 11. Today we have Louis. Louis, my good friend. How are you? Louis Couttoupes. How do you actually say your last name? How do you pronounce it?
Couttoupes.
Couttoupes.
Yes.
So I was way off.
It's a very, very misspelled and probably mispronounced Greek name.
Oh, okay, cool. So is that that would be your background? What is your background?
My grandfather came from a very far eastern island of Greece, but he actually migrated here from Russia on an Italian passport. So during Australia's White Australia policy, there was many opportunities for that name to be bastardized, anglified, misspelt. And when they had a big boat of Greeks and Italians sort of marching off, they were just like, this is how your name is spelled from now on.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
That is so much more than I expected from that question, so that was so good. So today, Louis is my first official guest on InBirks.
Honoured.
Yeah, thank you. Well, welcome again. What I kind of want to do with this podcast and with this sort of quote unquote channel is sort of talk a little bit more about more so the individuals within hospitality. Talk about their stories, talk about their backgrounds, talk about their upbringings and sort of where they derived from wherever they might have come from, overseas or within the country themselves, or whatever sort of career background that they might have fallen out of or into coming into hospitality. Because I think it's such an interesting industry, being someone who was within the industry for almost my whole life. It's something that something that's taken me on a journey of sort of self-awareness and self-development, and really shown me the best and the worst sides of humanity itself. I did actually a really cool interview with Lara, who was a staff member at Kitta, and we used to do these videos about a little bit more in-depth questionnaires of who they are and you know, a little bit of fun videos and whatnot. And she said a really good thing about humanity when I asked her about it, because she never had a background in hospitality. And I said, what was the one thing that you found out about humanity working in hospitality? And she said that common sense isn't that common. So I thought that was pretty funny.
It's more like a rare gift.
Yeah. So yeah, your cultural background and sort of where you derive from. You've always not lived in Canberra? Doing some research. Where did you originally grow up?
I grew up in the University of Sydney, which, like, my parents still live there. They still live in the same house they bought when I was a kid, like baby. And I love that part of the world. Like, I think one of the reasons I love food and love eating and cooking is because that part of Sydney where I grew up, it was so close to so many different like cultural groupings, and food is the best expression for sort of those groups to sort of bring themselves together. You go 20 minutes in one direction and there's just like amazing Indian food or Lebanese food, and you go in 10 minutes another direction and you've got Greek, you've got Vietnamese. Like, it's just, you got two different little Italies within 10 minutes of where I grew up. And I think that exposure and accessibility of all those different kinds of food was just something I loved. Like, food was always very prominent and central in my house, and it was just, you know, we always ate together, and it was just a good place to always be, and always eating sort of what I thought at the time was really, really good food. Yeah, cool. Well, that's amazing. I think all of us could probably relate to sort of some attachment to food, and from such a young age, especially with people within this industry. But speaking about your parents, fantastic people, by the way. Gracie and I think very highly of them, and I think anyone who has sort of come in to the pleasure of meeting them could probably say the same thing. I think your dad is exceptionally funny in his own sort of wit and his sense of humor. In a grumpy old man way, sure. I love him. Like, dad and mum are sort of the most open, generous people I've met. They were like so supportive of me when I sort of wanted to change careers and start cooking. Super supportive and generous with their time and their money, and their, you know, and super patient with me as we built the place together. Like, it was a huge commitment from them to be able to help out and that kind of stuff. Like, Dad moved down here for 3 months. Yeah. Slept in a fold-out bed.
Crazy.
To help me build the place.
I saw that fold-out bed.
It looked super
Yeah.
creepy.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, we're talking about his current restaurant and project Onzium in Kingston, ACT, which we're definitely going to be touching on towards the end of this, but bringing it back to more so your upbringing and where you derive from. You were in the public service for almost a decade, I should say.
Just under, yeah.
Yeah. What sort of drew you to take that stance? And again, I did a little bit of research, and you studied political science, which you got a degree in.
Yeah, I did honours in international relations, kind of like within economics, and I did an honours thesis in labour standards in footwear and manufacturing, which was pretty horrifying.
Yeah, wow.
I assume things have changed a little bit, but it's hard to bring yourself to buy some big name shoes now. I mean, to be honest, any footwear. I could go on and on about that.
Okay. Maybe we should do a little bit of background check on Birks, because maybe in Birkenstock seem relatively...
We'll find out.
Yeah, they seem all right, but yeah, who knows? They kind of just, tell you what they want you to see type thing. And
a lot of marketing involved in that. But anyway, I studied that.
Yeah.
And
what drew attention to that, and what got you interested in that? Because, like I said, your parents seem relatively switched on. Did they have a role in terms of your political conversations that you might have had when you were younger?
Yeah, like my family was always politically conscious, politically active.
Mm-hmm.
They grew up in the 70s in Sydney, and they were involved in a lot of sort of progressive and feminist sort of political movements in Sydney. And I think that really shaped my view of the world, my sister's view of the world. And I think my mum was a social worker and a TAFE teacher of social work. My dad was a trade unionist my whole life. So that social activism and a social conscious sort of approach to how you sort of live your life, do your work, all those kinds of things, was really imprinted on me.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, in terms of the conversations we had when we're sitting around the dinner table, like politics and those kinds of stuff were never off the table. Like, there were always conversations. I know there's a lot of Anglo families in particular where conversations about politics are just... No, this is polite time. You're not allowed to talk about religion. You're not allowed to talk about politics.
Yeah.
My family was never like that. It was always, if there was something to be an interesting and a sort of robust conversation, it's probably the best way of putting it. That was always there.
Wow.
And I think it took me a little while to realize that not everybody grew up like that. So I can sometimes be a bit forward in putting my views there, and it's taken me a while to get a bit sort of older, a bit more mature, maybe to realize that sort of having conversations and arguments and that kind of stuff sometimes it's a little bit of a slower process. It's like a bit more subtle, a bit more nuanced to what if you're trying to get a point across.
Yeah.
But I think I learned that later in life as well.
I never, when growing up, we never really had those conversations. I think I always had a disassociation from being quote unquote political, and even even with my partner Gracie and whatever, that tends to be a little bit more what was talked about on the dinner table. Like, even when I go over to have dinner there, those subjects and those sort of topics are spoken about more often than what I would speak with my parents or around my dinner table at home growing up and whatnot. And I think I've encountered the more so negative sort of the negative factors that come out of that. I'm a little bit less aware of what's going on around me. I'm a little bit more ignorant towards sort of some things, and I'm sort of a little bit more oblivious to some degree as well. I think, I don't know whether or not it's a good or a bad thing and whatever. And obviously people have that saying of like sort of that ignorance is bliss. But I think I'm getting to that age of being a little bit more mature and having conversations even with you and having conversations with Gracie about those things. And it's just sort of been a really good eye opener for some stuff as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing I've always, my position's always been like, where people try and separate, say, they think politics, I'm insulated from politics, or economics doesn't really affect me. I don't need to know who's in government. I've never really bought that, because like, if you think about it, you got working parents in hospitality. If they need to put their kids in childcare is a government policy, whether that's funded by them or not, where you've got parental leave, parental care. Like when you're talking about, community safety and security projects, that kind of stuff, that affects us. That affects everybody. You talk about the level of taxation, you talk about the level of wages, the wage rates you pay our staff. Those things, they're not obviously affecting you on a day-to-day basis, but I think the more you look at every single thing that affects us and how we interact as a society, an industry, all that kind of stuff, it never stops, does it?
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah, no.
Like,
no.
you know, there's been wage increases. There's been a new report called Respect at Work, which is about changing the legal obligations on employers and having a positive onus on employers in preventing sexual harassment and intimidation in the workplace. They're going to roll that out, but there's those kinds of things that are like following what happened up at Parliament House with the, Grace Tame and Brittany Higgins sort of cases that were sort of very prominent and really serious. Started getting people talking about this stuff in a whole new different way, and then that's when politics comes into it, and it affects us. It's not always obvious to us straight away, but then all of a sudden you've got, hey guys, you got to start implementing some new training schedules and training programs. Otherwise, you're in breach of your obligations as an employer.
Yeah.
I think I'm grateful for my upbringing in that I can sort of bridge that gap between how I started my life, like professionally working in the public service and studying and that kind of thing, because I can see it gave me an ability to draw like across boundaries and figure out things and think about things potentially a little bit differently. But I don't think one's better or worse than the other. They're just different ways of growing up. And if you get there one way or the other in your own time, cool. If you don't, like, you're still going to be sort of experiencing the world and going through it in your own way. And even if you don't seem to agree that politics affects us in everyday life, like, you might not accept it from your opinion point of view. I'm not saying you, but someone might not accept that. The reality is it kind of does, even if they don't, like, my view is it does, even if they don't want to see it that way.
Yeah.
You know?
I think I was in that boat as well, and I think I was sort of needed that friendly, gentle push and reminder every now and then about it. But I think even just hearing you talk about it, and again, our private conversations that we've had and whatnot about topics and subjects, that it's safe to say that you're extremely passionate about it. And I always have this sort of really deep, I don't know, like, I always really respect people who sort of have that passion, have that drive. And obviously, like, you know, the people within hospitality as well, like, there is a sense of passion that and obsession that you need to sort of apply to your work as well. But I just think it's absolutely amazing that you've sort of spent almost a decade within the public service to then, and what I'm really actually, or I sort of like my biggest point, what I wanted to talk to you about today is that what defining moments sort of led you to your departure of the public service, because, you know, like, and take this path into hospitality where you are leaving behind, I don't really know from your personal experience with it all, but you're kind of sort of leaving behind, like, things like financial freedom, a little bit more job security, holidays, and sort of a normal life, and virtually what everyone's sort of told to aspire for or to get from a career, to live out your days, then to retire and then die peacefully. It's like, what that just like blows my mind that you decided to sort of leave everything behind and go have this amazing life.
I think, like, I don't know there was necessarily one, like, defining moment. It was probably a series of events over the course of a couple of years that I don't think it was also, like, one defining moment. It wasn't just a defining moment about not just leaving. It was also not, like, a specific defining moment about starting hospitality. When I left public service, I didn't actually have any plans to become a chef. I had no real plans to do anything, which is why it took so long in a way for me to leave.
Yeah.
I don't think I had an upbringing or parents or a perspective on life where it's just like, these are my goals, this is what I want to achieve. So it's not like, go to uni, get a good job, get financial security, get a mortgage, get married, have kids, whatever. That was never going to be my story. Not that I think I'm exceptional in any way. It just wasn't who I am. I loved uni. My first job actually in high school was working for a Greek restaurant, a suburban Greek restaurant. And I always wanted to be a chef when I was younger. I think every chef is going to say that. So I don't think that's, like, new or novel or whatever. I always loved cooking. I always loved, the idea of being a chef, because I loved, like, knowing about creativity and that kind of stuff. So I did a work experience at a Greek restaurant around the corner from my parents' house. And I loved learning all of those kinds of things. But I remember looking at my boss, a really, really good chef called Dave Tsedekos, who I think is doing some really important things about mental health and hospitality, because he's had his own physical and mental health sort of battles that he is very open about, because it's just such a difficult industry, I think, to work in. And it's like, it takes a toll on your body and your mind. And I think he has been very good in trying to take care of himself, because he's got young kids, all the rest of it. Anyway, when I worked for him, I remember thinking, this is not what I thought being a chef would be like. It's not glamorous. Like, you work ridiculous hours. The money is not great. You don't have a social life. You don't have a family life. And I was only a 15-year-old kid, so I was giving up my Fridays and Saturdays to, you know, wait tables, wash dishes, make plates. Like, it was enjoyable. But at the end of it, I was like, you know what? I don't think I want to be a chef anymore. And I'd started to sort of take more of an interest in academic stuff. So I was getting towards deciding to go to uni. I was enjoying studying languages and international relations. Politics is kind of what I wanted to do. When I got a grad job in Canberra after I finished uni, I moved down here in 2007 with my girlfriend at the time, and we both got jobs. She got the job actually that I wanted, and she got a job that I don't think she was that keen on to start with, but I really wanted to work in that kind of foreign affairs development side of things. But then I guess the more I think I probably thought I was going to have more of a chance to affect change in the world by being a public servant. And I think a lot of young...
I feel like that's consistent across the narrative that I hear from people working.
100%. Everyone thinks they're going to go in there and they're going to change the world. They're going to sort of somehow form it to be a better version of what they think the world should be like. And it doesn't take very long for a lot of them to realize that that's not what the public service is, and that's not to diss it. It's a hugely important part of civil society and what makes things function. I mean, you know, you've got two parents that have been public servants in the Commonwealth public sector. Sometimes those jobs seem a little bit frustrating at times, I guess, but they are critically important to delivery of like essential services and sort of making sure Australia is doing what it should be doing in the world and that kind of stuff. But for me, the work didn't sort of match what I kind of was really wanting to do. So I was never really happy working in the public service. I just never found the work, all of that.
Fulfilling, maybe?
Fulfilling. And I think I got to a point in my life where I realized, like, I accepted, maybe is a better word, I accepted that I was never going to be one of those people who was defined by my job. I was going to I was going to go to work. I was going to do my job. When I finished my job, I was going to go fishing or you know, cooking or hiking or camping, and I was going to be someone that was defined by the things that weren't my job, and I was kind of happy with that. But then I got to a point when I was like towards the end of my career, my relationship was starting to break down. I was not happy in my work, and I was looking at it going, I'm not happy about any of these things. Like, I'm not happy in my life. Even if I was to go fishing every day after work, I'm still not going to be happy, because the vast majority of my time is spent doing something I do not find particularly inspiring or interesting or...
Wow.
I mean, I think all the people I used to work with would probably agree with me, and I'm 100% upfront about saying this. I don't think I was a very good public servant. I would look at something and go like, this is really important. I really give a shit about this. And then I'd have to go to a meeting and be like, sorry, we're not going to do that. We're not going to fund that. You've got to, you know, scale this down, or our position is that you can't do that. And when you have a change of government, whether you agree or disagree with them, you have to also change, in many ways, you have to change your take when you go to those meetings. And sometimes, I mean, that can be exceedingly frustrating. But I also found that, like, you know, there was one big international meeting that we were supposed to brief for, and the feedback we got was like, yeah, the PM was really, really happy with the brief. There was like this 250-page booklet about going to some international summit. Now I'm meeting with like probably a dozen world leaders talking about dozens and dozens of issues over the course of 3 days. And they were like, yeah, PM was stoked with the brief. And I'm like, just think about what we achieved there. Like, in my opinion, we probably made the world a little bit worse. Not drastically worse, but the things that we agreed to, the things that we pushed for, or the things that we relinquished, mean that the world is probably less safer, less progressive, and less tolerant and welcoming. And for me, I was like, you know what? Maybe if there was one moment where I was like, it was at a little kind of heartbreak, I'm like, you know what? I don't think I want to stay here, hey. And after 10 years, when people would be like, here's a document. I need you to do our thing. And I'm like, cool. What's our thing? I don't know.
Yeah.
What am I supposed to be doing here?
Yeah. That's sort of there's
a
that
lack of
line
confidence
becomes
in
a little
it.
bit blurred.
Yeah. So eventually, I think it was November 2000. I want to say 15.
Mm-hmm.
I think November 2014. I quit public service. I was actually taking some stress leave just because I was just finding it quite overwhelming.
Wow. Yeah.
And I eventually was like, look, I don't want to go back. The idea of going back is just it's causing me too much anxiety. Going to somewhere I don't want to be, doing work I'm not interested in. But when I did hand in my resignation, I had no plans to do anything. There was no like, cool, this is what we're doing next. So me and this is still the same girlfriend I moved down to Canberra with from Sydney. We ended up breaking up about 12 months, about a month after that actually. So there was two pretty dramatic shifts for me.
Okay. Yeah.
And I then ended up basically without a suitcase for the next 18 months. Not that, like, I don't want to say like I was homeless. I wasn't living rough, but I was between my parents' place. I was between family members up in Sydney. I was in a pretty weird spot. And a couple of months after that, my new partner, we went traveling to Europe with the intention of hanging out in Paris for a little bit and then moving on.
Yeah.
And we were writing this kind of like 2-bit food blog. Like I really like taking photos, and I think she was trying to encourage me to cook more. And she's always been very, very good with food.
Yeah, I can tell your grid on Instagram is fantastic.
Hot tip, that's all her.
Kiss.
All her. And we came up with this idea that I'd maybe go and, like, the restaurants we were going to hang out in, were all super fun, really relaxed. And they were just like, this is kind of cool. Like, this is a really good vibe. They're all like English, Australian, like American, Swedish, Japanese chefs doing some really, really cool shit.
Yeah.
Like really not experimental, like super fine dining foams and shit, but they were just like, let's go to the markets, let's make stuff up on the spot. Like we'd write the menu. They would write the menu 5 o'clock every day, which I thought was incredible.
Yeah.
And we did this food blog thing where I'd go in and have a chat I'd work for them for one day or a couple of days or whatever. And I'd learn some recipes, take some photos, and we'd do a blog piece about them. It was more for us than anything else.
Yeah.
And I did one on this guy called James Henry, who's an Australian chef, who's just opened a place with a guy called Sean Kelly, another Australian guy, and they've just got this incredible place in the outskirts of Paris where, like, basically like a chateau set up like a hotel, and they've been working for the last 3 years to build like probably 4 or 5 acres of like garden stuff that's what they sell in their restaurant.
Yeah,
it's
cool.
incredible.
I've been seeing a lot of them.
More and more people doing that.
Which is crazy. There's this place is it Adelaide or maybe Perth, the Botanical? I don't know if you've heard
they
of
just
those
got
guys as well, it seems. Yeah,
they just got best new restaurant Gourmet Traveller.
That's why I think I saw it, and it's we were watching this show on Netflix, and it seems there was another one that was around somewhere in Australia as well, and that seems to be an amazing take on the hospo dining scene and stuff like that, just really deriving from fresh produce, their own produce, and it just sort of seems to be elevated from that next level and taking it to like something that's amazing. But it's crazy that you found it there. Would you feel like that was sort of your first experience having that exposure to that side of hospitality?
Yeah, absolutely.
At that time?
Well, that's kind of, again, I was going to say, if there was a single moment I could probably pinpoint where I decided that I wanted to try cooking, there was like one of our favorite restaurants, and we'd become quite good friends with the chef, a place called Au Passage. There was a guy called Ed that was working there. He was the head chef, and yeah, super French, right? Edward Delling-Williams was his name. He's opened up a place in Normandy now, but he was the head chef there. He used to work at places like St. John's in London, so real nose-to-tail philosophy.
Right.
They'd get like a half a pig every day at this place, Au Passage. One of my jobs, like, haven't got that far yet, but they would get a whole pig delivered mid-service, and you can imagine, like, if someone turns up with half a pig and you've got to carry it from there to there in a full restaurant. And like in Paris, no one batted an eye. Like, you'd be like, yeah, cool, well, that's what we're eating tomorrow. Yeah. Here, I think you might struggle a bit more. But I just love that approach to food. And they were advertising for a chef, and we got drunk, and my girlfriend was just like, what about this new chef position you need? And Ed just looked at her and said, I don't know, you'd be cut out for the kitchen. She's, she's not She's not particularly small. She's quite petite.
Yeah.
And she was just like, nah, not for me. He'll work for free. He wants to learn. So she basically just offered me up as free labor.
Yeah.
So
we ended up sitting there just like, oh,
yep,
I guess so.
I mean, it was pretty exciting. It was a great opportunity. And I just went in every day for about 3 months before we ended up coming home. And I loved it. Like in contrast to 10 years almost 10 years in the public service, where I'm still like, I still feel out of my depth. Like I automatically kind of felt like I knew what I was supposed to be doing.
Wow.
In a kitchen. It's just like, all right, we've got to clean up. Cool. Show this to me once and I could get that, rather than show something to me like 5 times in the public service. I'm just like, I still don't really get what I'm supposed to be doing here.
Yeah, and it gets to a point where you're sort of just you're keen for the challenge and you're keen for the shot to learn something new. But then when it becomes just so mistreated and just not exactly what you thought it was going to be, it's just there's just not that drive anymore, I guess, to keep interested in it.
And I think with cooking, there was that spark immediately. Like knowing what to do, feeling comfortable, feeling like it was much more intuitive for me. And I was like, okay, this feels like a much better place for me to be. And that's, I think that there was I still didn't think I was going to be a chef. I was like, I'm enjoying this. Yeah. But then there was one night, maybe in the first week or so, where I sat down with Ed and he was just like, why are you doing this? Like, what do you, like, you're over 30.
Yeah.
Everyone else in this kitchen is like 5 to 10 years younger than you, including him. He was like 5 years younger than me. And he was like, why are you doing this? Like, you have to understand that if you want to be a chef, like, he's like, you have a good palate and you kind of get keen to learn and you get it. And he was also like, you're messy and you're disorganized and you're 10 years too old. I was like, thanks, bro. Yeah. But he's like, if you want this, you have to work. You have to read every book you can find. You have to work harder. Yeah. Because everybody else has been doing this for 5 years and they're 10 years younger than you.
They've got that on you, yeah.
Exactly. So for me, I was like, all right, cool. If I do want to do this, and I hadn't really thought about it because I still knew that the hours of a chef, the lifestyle of a chef, holding down a relationship if you're a chef, it sucks. It's hard. And I was like, okay, well, I don't really know what else I'm going to do. I might as well try doing this, learn everything I can. And then eventually, I think it was that moment I always probably look back on it and say like, okay, cool. If I do want this, I'm going to have to apply myself in a way that I didn't really think to. Yeah. But I'm going to have to.
Would you say?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. No.
Yeah, no. Yeah. Would you say like you sort of almost took like an academic approach to it, given your sort of?
I'd never thought about it like that.
Because
I can see that.
I don't know. Like, I'm not very academic at all personally. For example, like I've only just sort of.
That's just because if you haven't studied, that doesn't mean you're not academic. Like maybe that's it's a fairly specific use of the term, but like an inquisitive mind is just as important as being academic. And this is slightly tangential. If you go to uni, I don't use any of the specific things that I learn at uni on a day-to-day basis. I never even use them in the public service. Yeah. What a formal and structured education gives you, and I'm a really strong proponent of this, is it teaches you the skills to engage critically with the world. Yeah. You just look at a piece of information, and rather than the bullshit Trump and Musk can put out, you can look at it and go, I'm not entirely sure, like, that's not rigorous enough for me to believe that is, sourced, backed up, and substantiated. Like, you can look at someone saying, like, oh, vaccines are this and vaccines are that. They're bad, they're going to sort of undermine our sort of society and whatever. But you're like, you're not basing that on, like, I don't need to be a scientist to know that I trust scientists. I don't trust any old, like, Fruit Loop or a YouTube channel. Yeah,
of course.
I think and it's not exclusively to university or formal structured education, but what university and a formal and structured education does give you is that capacity to engage with the world critically, look at it and say, and it helps you form your own views. You can look at it and go, I believe, like, you can start with positions, say, this is what I believe in, it's like A, B, and C. You can read a few academic articles and you go, you know what? That's changed my mind, because that is a well-argued case. The evidence is there. It's not just bullshit, self-serving propaganda for whatever reason. If that makes sense. Anyway, sorry, we were off topic.
No. I mean, it gives me a little bit more of an understanding about it to some degree. But I think what I am really curious about in terms of just like even your time overseas and in Europe and whatnot is, I think it's safe to say that in general, there's always been this stigma and this sort of overarching thing about hospitality being quite well known to have such a toxic environment in terms of drug abuse or alcohol abuse, and even not so much at negative things, but even the positive things like, being able to sort of extend your palate or work within a team or work on projects that are super 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 fun, which can sometimes become renowned in your country, if not in the world, which is a fantastic opportunity. And it seems to be like the only place sometimes where you can achieve that. But I wanted to ask in terms of what the culture was like in Paris, in terms of just like more so the negative aspects to it and whatnot, and how did you sort of go about that within your early years of becoming a chef?
Like when I was working in Paris, like specifically learning about that.
Yeah.
Well, I think it was the first time I'd worked in kitchens, and I was also older.
Yeah. Okay.
I think there's a chance that I was quite lucky in that the team, it was a small one. There was, when I started, 4 chefs, and one of them was leaving. That's the one that I was, in theory, replacing. But she was an exceptionally talented dessert chef who used to work at like dinner at Heston's. So I had to learn a couple of her desserts and then try and figure out how to make it. I was not a scratch on her. She is amazing. There was a Swedish guy and there was an American guy. And then there was Ed, the head chef. And when they would party hard.
Yeah.
So it was like, I think chef life, because of the high pressure environment, because everyone's kind of young, everyone's fully loaded on, adrenaline at the end of a shift, they would still go out. And I remember one of the chefs turned up still blazed. I don't think he'd gone to bed. And he was wearing there's a photo of him on Instagram, and he's got like a fishnet shirt on just when he arrived, and the fish delivery had come in, and there's this like conger eel, which is like a 2-meter eel that's about that thick. Yeah. And he's just got it wrapped around him and he's playing it like a guitar, like this.
Straight from the rave.
Like some fucked up rock star, man.
Yeah.
It was loose. But I think that stuff is everywhere because of the nature of the industry.
Yeah.
And like a lot of people use that nature of the industry in a way that I don't particularly like. It facilitates that kind of behavior, I guess, rather than saying it is the nature of the industry.
Yeah.
Like the nature of the industry, it's high pressure, it's hard work. But because we facilitate and enable a lot of behaviors like that, like the number of times you walk into a kitchen, it's like, yeah, cool, you want some bags? Do you not want some bags? Like, let's go out drinking after work, like, whatever. And again, just up front, I'm not in a position to be lecturing anybody about like, not drinking too heavily, because as I've already told you off air, we had our first year birthday party today. And my voice is a little bit more gravelly than it usually is. We'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
But we had a good time. It was fun. And I think people tend to kind of let loose pretty hard in hospitality. That was, I think, probably the same in Paris. Being a foreign city as well, I still didn't sort of have that connection to it. I was still hanging around with a lot of the expat chefs, if that makes sense. But I also think being older and having a bit more life experience, and this is translated, I think, from Paris to here, like I'm less likely to, and also maybe it's my personality, I'm less likely to tolerate when someone just starts heaping shit on you. Like if I see someone targeting another person or acting aggressively or intimidating, I just don't have any time for that. I don't think, even when I was a junior sort of staff member, it was something I was never going to put up with. Like if I was working in a kitchen and had the shit kicked out of me, emotionally, verbally, or whatever, I'm like, this is not what this is about. Like I've spoken to so many chefs who are like, well, if you don't want to work the big hours, if you don't want to put up with that kind of stuff and accept the fact that the best chefs in the world are psychopaths, like as Netflix is kind of, has on display all the time, then what the hell are you doing being a chef? And I'm like, because it doesn't have to be like that. For me, cooking and hospitality is about enjoying yourself and making sure the people that you're working with are enjoying themselves and the people you're serving are enjoying themselves. If there's a breakdown anywhere there, like not only is it going to come through in the service or the food or whatever, like it's just a not enjoyable time for anybody. And I started cooking because I enjoyed it. I started working in hospitality because I enjoyed it. Yeah. The moment I stop enjoying it, like at its fundamental core about what I'm doing, because it's just the environment is toxic or the team doesn't gel, you've got to reconsider it. And that's why I left the public service. And I think that's a really good lesson for me. It was just like, I did not enjoy what I was doing in the public service. That is why I left.
Yeah.
If that ever happens again in public, like cooking wise, I have to look at it again and say like, well, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And I think you and I both know the long hours, the lack of kind of like flexibility in your social life and that kind of stuff. Like as a manager and an owner, someone gets sick, you're the one that has to put pick up the slack.
Yeah.
I've had chefs, like I've been to Sydney twice in the last 10 weeks maybe for like GT and the Good Food Awards.
Yeah.
On both nights, one of my chefs messaged me and said, hey, I've had an accident, I'm in emergency, I'm not going to be able to come to work tomorrow. Is there any chance you can come home early? And I was like, are you serious?
Yeah. It's
and
always
then
like that.
the day I got into an Uber with my sister to go for a drink first before I went to the Good Food Awards, and I got a message from one of my other chefs, and he sent me a photo of his car, and he just totaled it. Like the whole bumper caved in. It's like, yeah, I'm not going to be able to come to work tomorrow. And I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like, and then at some point you got to say like, you know what? If I have one opportunity to go to these things, if I say no to that, like, what am I risking? Am I risking the service and my business falling apart?
Yeah.
Or do I miss out on those? And not that accolades are what we work for, but they're a really nice chance to let your hair down, spend some time and meet people in a similar situation.
And in the industry,
But also enjoy the things, the recognition.
Yeah.
That
And
kind
there's
of
nothing
stuff.
wrong with that as well.
It's just hard when you're looking at back in, 300 kilometers away and you're like, cool, I don't know what I'm supposed to do tomorrow.
Yeah. And I think like it's nothing, it's like just talking about like, your responsibility in the sense that, when shit goes down or something happens or someone's called in sick or whatever, like, or someone needs the night off and you're understaffed and you have the option of either, putting, sort of this person on that shift, which might mean that within that week they might be sort of overworking themselves, and you got to take their sort of their mental health and sort of their physical health and just the whole their whole thing into play. Not so much just sort of that one shift. It's just whatever's going around. Or do you do you as the owner or the manager sort of put yourself in the position where when those things happen, like that's when you need to step up a little bit, and that's when you sort of put yourself in the situation where you're working the hardest that week, and that's sometimes a really delicate spot to be in, and especially when you're juggling your own mental health and sort of what you can sort of handle yourself.
Yeah, like you have a responsibility as an employer to your staff to make sure that they're taken care of. But the other thing I always have to keep remembering as well, and it's like that's where there's not the same level of commitment from sort of younger staff members who are maybe uni students as to owners and managers. This is not necessarily their career. This is something they're doing because they enjoy it. They make some friends. They pay the bills, and it's like some of them take it very, very seriously. But some of them are just like, I'm easy either way, and that's fine. I think being able to be an effective manager is also to recognise that for these people, everybody except yourself, it's to a limit. It is just a job.
Yeah.
They can be very good at it, but it is just a job. And the moment it stops being enjoyable and they want to find somewhere else where they can get more fulfillment, they can get better experience, better training, better exposure, then they're not going to stay because it is just a job. And that's why I think I hate all those sort of tropes about like, oh, we're a family and that kind of stuff, because it puts this framing around your relationship with your staff, which can be really good and really strong without it sort of feeling like it's like a Hallmark card, if that makes sense. For me, like, I love my guys, all of them. We butt heads a lot of the time, but like all of the guys that work at the restaurant are good people. Like, you've got to learn different ways of managing them, but understanding as well that they want to be, like, I hope that they want to be there when they come in, because we're trying to create a workplace and a work environment that is, it's positive, it's helpful for them to sort of, even if they move out of hospitality. A couple of the younger kids we've just given a promotion to, sort of in that lower, like, junior kind of management level, and they're sort of teaching them about management principles that they can take outside of hospitality. It's not about learning how to manage as a hospitality worker. It's about how to manage people, how to manage your interactions, how to supervise, how to delegate, how to take responsibility, and how to how to be a manager in hospitality are skills you take everywhere. It sounds like a Macca's ad for, whatever, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Life skills as well.
Exactly. And that's like what I guess I was trying to get at before about the formal and structured education. You can still get that in like workplace education just by being there and learning those things.
Yeah.
And you can get what we were talking about before, like that perspective on how the rest of the world operates outside these four walls.
Yeah.
Through your interactions with your customers, through your interactions with your staff, all that kind of stuff. You need to be inquisitive and you need to give a shit. If you don't, that's never going to go anywhere. But you don't have to have the formal education to kind of get to what we were talking about, I guess. If that makes sense.
No, that's super insightful. I think I can resonate with definitely all of that. Do you need more water?
Maybe.
Maybe get some more water. Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
Thanks, dude.
Yeah, cool. Well, I think what you touched on, Lucy, before we had like conversations about sort of sort of workplace interactions and how to actually really make your staff feel in terms of sort of how you couldn't you don't really have the time or the patience for sort of making someone feel like shit or being made to feel like shit for making a mistake or sort of like an error within the workplace and whatnot. And I think even from my experience in being hospitality and sort of being in it my whole life really, and what I would see on movies and Netflix and sort of this perception towards the hospitality industry itself is that I always felt that there was always this divide between... Thank you. There's this divide between sort of this new and old, this new age and this old age of sort of hospitality, and more so originally there was this sort of sort of this no fucks given type of mentality back in the day about it, and how you can sort of treat your staff and you can sort of berate them and you can yell at them and you can make them feel like they've made this earth-shattering mistake where it was just an incorrect method, or they might have thought about it in a different way. But it's really refreshing to really hear from yourself, who is a little bit more experienced than me and a little bit older than me.
You probably worked in hospitality longer than me, man.
Yeah, but it's good to hear that it's not so much this whole new and old age. It's not, we're not sort of excluded to age. What am I trying to say? We're not necessarily excluded to a different era of hospitality.
Yeah.
More so, it's just the individual themselves and how they want to handle situations in their own sort of life experiences and whatnot.
There's a culture shift as well. Like what I was saying before about the Respect at Work report that's coming out. Like that's huge. That's going to be a huge difference in I've had to undertake sexual harassment awareness training. Like I've had to sort of do that training for the staff because there were a couple of incidents at a few places I've worked at where it became very obvious that the younger guys, because not because but of them working in hospitality their whole lives, but they lacked an awareness about what that kind of stuff meant. It was very much this perspective of something like sexual harassment that was, I don't know if you've ever watched Community, where Chevy Chase's character is like, how can it be harassment if I'm trying to give you a compliment? And you're like, nah, dude, like you can't make jokes, you can't make comments. Like if it's unwanted, I mean, banter's banter, I get that, but it has to be consensual on both sides. If it's not and it makes someone feel uncomfortable, then this is pushing beyond the boundaries of respectfulness. And beyond that, it's also like inappropriate in a workplace. Exactly. And that's what it comes back to. Like, this is a workplace, this is a job. As an employer, my most important responsibility to my staff is to make sure that they can expect and can turn up to a workplace that is respectful and safe.
That they want to be at, that they want to work at.
That's a basic legal requirement when it comes down to it. And a lot of people I've spoken to in hospitality don't see it like that. They're just like, this is just hospitality, man. This is what it was like when I grew up. I got paid shit. I got yelled at all the time. I got shit thrown at me in the kitchen. Like, I've heard some horror stories about kitchens in Canberra. Like, someone doing something wrong and all of a sudden this gastro pan comes flying past their head because they cooked the chicken wrong or something. It's like, okay, cool. I got a whole bunch of young guys at the moment. And my primary job when I'm cooking or in the kitchen is keeping an eye on them and making sure they're doing things right. I'm doing much less prep because my job is now trying to make sure that they're doing the list of jobs that we have in front of us correctly. And you'll find a whole bunch of things that aren't done the way you want to do them. And I mean, sure, I could be more exacting, I could be demanding, I could be like, what the fuck, man? Like, this is it's unacceptable. Start again. Like, this is, the only time we ever have to start something again is if it's like catastrophically unusable.
Yeah.
But
It makes someone sick.
yeah, it's like it's not platable, it's not whatever it is. But otherwise, any other time you could look at it and say, okay, how can we fix this? And why is this like this? Without being too, contrived about it. Like, every mistake is like a learning opportunity.
100%.
When you're a first year apprentice and you're like, cool, I didn't realize I was supposed to do it like that. My bad. I should have been sort of looking over your shoulder a bit more. But I'm trying to give these guys space to learn and make mistakes so that they can figure out problem-solving solutions to these kind of things themselves. Because hospitality is essentially a problem-solving sort of situation. When you've got 10 people waiting for tables outside, you don't know which table's going to come in inside. It's like playing a four-dimensional game of Tetris with individual personalities at 3 o'clock in the morning that you've got to overlay with that. That's not easy.
Yeah. No.
But like that stuff, moving into that really positive workplace environment and culture for me, I'm hoping is where things go. Like individuals can do what they can in their four walls, but there needs to be, I think, a pretty big culture shift as well, and they need to move beyond that. That's what hospitality is like.
Yeah.
Attitude, because that treatment and underpayment and poor treatment of staff, it's not because of the nature of the industry. It's because that people that work in the industry perpetuate it because that's the way the only way they know, and that's what they tolerate. Yeah. So.
Well, I mean, even on that subject of culture and, leading back to where when you came back to Canberra after traveling a little bit, you obviously had the opportunity to take up work at Bar Rockford, which that's when I actually met you, and that's when we became friends. And I was only able to unfortunately come by, I think, once to experience your menu before you left. But how was your time at Bar Rockford, and what are the situations that we might not have seen behind?
That
everything
was
else?
An incredibly challenging time.
Yeah.
When I moved down to Canberra, I was still trying to fix up some personal stuff that I needed to focus on. So I moved down to Canberra before I had proper roots back here because, again, I'd broken up with my ex-partner. So the place that we had together, we didn't anymore. I was like trying to make sure that I could find somewhere to stay, get a new job. I was trying to figure out how to put this. I was trying to come down and fix relationship with my new partner because it had been like travel had put a huge amount of strain on it. So had hospitality. There you go.
Yeah.
So I was trying to figure out how to start again in Canberra with a new job that I knew nothing about, and sort of land on my feet a little bit. And it took us a long time to get there, but we got there in the end. From a relationship point of view, which couldn't be happier about. But the work at the restaurant, trying to sort of establish a new place, get us going as a restaurant, that took an enormous toll on us as well. It just, to this day, it's still some of the more traumatic experiences of our relationship. But I think, so I started at Rockford when I came down here washing dishes. The only way I could get the job was to do junior chef shift work, like prepping and stuff. Whenever there wasn't a chef in the kitchen, they'd teach me how to cook. I would do the dishes on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and on Friday, Saturday, I had to change my clothes and wait tables on Friday, Saturday night. So when the chefs would clock off on Friday, Saturday night, I would have been there since the morning, and then they'd put me on the door as a bouncer if there was a queue of 20 or 30 people. So the only thing I didn't do at Rockford in the 3 years I was there was make cocktails, because I can't make cocktails for shit. I'm learning. But like I did everything there just because that was like I had to sort of take that to get the job. About 12 months after we opened, there was a couple of head chefs that had started and left because they had like some of it was pre-planned, some of it wasn't. But from about December, Nagesh and I, who was another chef who's just opened his own place called Munze in Melbourne, Mauritian joints. Like they just got a hat as well.
Well done.
I really want to get down there and say good day to him. But we used to work side by side as the kind of co-head chefs for a little while. And then he ended up leaving to move to Melbourne, and I ended up taking over the head chef position. And because Rockford was still predominantly a bar, we found it really, like, people weren't taking us that seriously as a restaurant or a food venue at the time. We weren't pulling in the money we needed to justify the kitchen in Rockford for a very long time. It was a concerted effort to say, okay, we're now going to be a restaurant Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Friday, Saturday, we're always going to be full as a bar, but we need to sort of put it out there that we're actually doing restaurant quality food and try and book the place out for restaurant style service on like early week. Took us a little while, but we got there. But because we were still early, we hadn't got any of that kind of those national awards or recognition, we weren't on anybody's radar. So attracting and retaining staff was super hard. And I think there was one night, and I know Nick will remember this night as well, where like it was like a Tuesday or a Wednesday. It was some early weekday, and we had, for some reason, a huge number of people come through the door for food. Mm-hmm. And I had a dishie who was honestly one of the best dishes I've ever seen. He was super fast, super efficient, super clean. His English was really not great though, so it was really hard.
A good dishie is second to none. They
100%.
are.
Without that, you fall apart. But for me, I'd be like, hey, dude, can you go and grab this from the cool room? And he'd come back with something completely different. I was just like, okay, fair enough, I get it. But I was the only other person cooking, and I was doing numbers that we were doing on a Friday, on a Tuesday night or whatever it was. And the docket machine kept on going. And I just had to say to Nick, like, you've got to stop ordering food. I'm 20 minutes behind on these dockets I have now. I haven't even looked at those dockets to tell you if I have enough food to cook for them. Mm-hmm. And I pretty much, I had a breakdown in the kitchen that night because I was doing every dish for about 40, 50 people. I had literally no one else in the kitchen except the dishie. Mm-hmm. And Nick just immediately shut the kitchen down. It was like, no more orders. We're done. And like, as an example of how hard it was to find anyone, Nick was in the kitchen prepping with me and dishing and cooking with me for the next 2 months because we couldn't find anybody.
Wow.
And he hated it because he was like, what the hell am I doing, man? I've opened this business where a year and a half in, like, and I'm scrubbing potatoes. Like, no shit, he was making like chips and potatoes. And it was like, what am I doing? Like, I own this business. I can't step back from it. And I was under huge amounts of pressure. It was such a hard sort of hard job to be trying to do that. Like, I don't know. I almost walked away from it a couple of times because it was too much. Like, too many chefs, I think, use that kind of like the hours they do as a badge of honor because they're super tough and they want to be martyrs. Mm-hmm. Like, every time I look back at the hours and the weeks that I was doing, like 90 to 100-hour weeks, that's never something I look at it and go like, fuck yeah. I look at it and go, that was awful. Because when you think about it, you wake up on your days off and you're a zombie. Mm-hmm. I remember all my friends from previous life in the public service, like, hey, let's go for dinner or drinks or lunch on Sunday. I'm like, no, man. No. My partner works in the public service. Yeah. She works Monday to Friday. Sunday is the only day I have with her. My Sunday is sacred. Do not come with me. It's like, cool, all right, how about we do like lunchtime on a Monday? And they're like, oh, I got to work, man. It's like, you got to understand, for me, like, it's the lifestyles that don't match or overlap that well. You got to be able to, I think there's sacrifices you have to make, as hard as that is to accept. If you want to work in hospitality, and this isn't like a nature of the industry thing, the fact that we start work when most people are sort of wrapping their day up or whatever. Especially
if you're working in the restaurant.
Exactly. And I think it's just something you have to deal with, beyond the point.
Okay.
You accept that, but like you I think this the hardest thing behind the scenes, and it's the last thing I'll say on it, is like the effect it has on relationships, like personal relationships, is hard. Like, you don't see your significant other anywhere near as much as you'd like to. You don't get away for weekends. You don't get, like, my family's all still in Sydney, and my sister has just had a niece, like a daughter. So I've got a niece in Sydney that I've probably hung out with like 5 or 6 times, and she's almost a year old. And it kills me because, like, for me, every moment I have with her is super special. I love hanging out with her, but I have to go up to Sydney to do that. And on a Sunday morning when I'm knackered, more often than not, I've just looked at the car and gone like, I can't do it today. Wow. Those things hit hard, you know what I mean? They're the things behind the scenes. I'm sure you empathize with. Like,
and then, I mean, 100% I can completely understand, but fast forward however long you're at Bar Rock before, you get a hat.
At Rockford?
Now,
That's
Is it
pretty nuts.
worth it? Because when I think about a hat, obviously,
Is a hat worth it, or is like the whole thing worth it?
is the hat worth the whole thing? Like, there's this theory that I've been hearing a little bit more about wherever I'm sort of listening to about this sort of like this post-Olympic blues in terms of just these athletes, you know, training, killing themselves, doing all these things and putting themselves through this rigorous, intense lifestyle of training, which, you know, we can sort of just even compare to, you know, the hospitality and the industry itself. And then they go to the Olympics and then they receive a gold medal and they come home and they feel sense of depressed sort of outcome.
Didn't one of the dudes start selling cocaine or something?
Maybe.
I think.
Who knows?
Yeah, there was one swimmer that just got done for like. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I obviously I can only I've never been in that situation where I can sort of comprehend what it is like to sort of have that accolade, but it makes me just wonder in terms of just the industry itself, is that enough to outweigh all the sort of negatives of the industry and being in hospitality itself?
I don't think that in itself is, if that makes sense. Like, if I never set out like with the target of being a hatted restaurant, and to be honest, after the first 12 months, I'm kind of surprised it happened.
Yeah.
Like,
you just received another one. Congratulations on you. Just got another one. Woo. Is it worth it?
Well, I mean, it feels pretty cool, and everyone, like, I think for me, it's more, okay, first up, from a business point of view, doesn't matter if you have hats or not, you need customers. For it to be a viable business, I mean, hats help bring in customers, but I also think it's a bit of a flawed system because there are so many other venues that aren't on that level. Not on that level, sorry, not on that sort of, they're not recognized at that level that they probably should be. There should be some form of getting, like, promoting and assisting those businesses get people through the door, that if you only have like 6 or 7 hatted restaurants in Canberra, I mean, we have some other great places that really need people coming through. The hat is, I think for me personally, it feels like a huge, like I'm super proud of the team and I'm super proud of the restaurant. I'm really amazed at what we've been able to achieve. It exceeds my expectations by far. I think the happiest part I am about it is, and this sounds real weird and soppy, but it's like the effort my staff have put in as a team to create what we have, and that to be recognised. Because whenever we get written up about, it's not just about food, it's not just about wine, it's not just about cocktails or service. And I guess that's one of the things they talk about when they sort of do the write-ups. But it makes mention of all of those things. And that is probably the bit I'm most proud of. Like, when we had our first birthday party and chatting to some of my younger guys, and they were just like, oh, I'm so proud of this and I'm so cool. Like, I'm so stoked to be working at a place.
Be a part of something, yeah.
That is probably my favourite part. I think the risk about hats, though, is because they come and go, there's almost this pressure to keep it on there. Well, I've never been in a situation where I've had to try and retain the hat. So we'll see what happens next year, and I'll tell you next year if it's worth it. It's going to kind of, it does, trying to maintain it and trying to retain it and trying to make sure that everyone that works there isn't burnt out in the process of doing so. I'd prefer my guys to sort of have a better work-life balance and not have a hat than to have that hat and for all of them to just be like walking zombies and ready to head for the door, you know? Like, I prefer to have a work environment where people are happy to come to, the customers like to come to, and they enjoy the food, they enjoy the service, they enjoy the offering that we have, but they are like, as long as you can pay the bills, hats don't matter. Beyond a point, having said that, super grateful for it because it is like this amazing recognition of...
Shout out, good food, eh?
Oh, it was great.
Yeah.
It was really, really good.
Well, just to like sum it up real quick, just so for people that don't know, even I kind of get a bit confused how to even obtain a hat. Can you just quickly brush over what's the process that you need to go through in order to actually receive? There's no
like application process or anything. They basically have, I think at the moment I think they've broken it back down into states because there was a period where it was national. But basically you get reviewers that will come in. You'll generally speaking, you'll get a review from one of the key reviewers, and then over the next several months or however long it is, and they won't come in. You won't get a key review every year. But once you've got a hat, from my understanding, is they send a whole bunch of secret reviewers in. You won't know who they are. And they will come in and they'll behave like normal diners. They won't come in and say, they won't be demanding that. They always pay for their dinner, so there's no technical way really of knowing who they are.
Yep.
But they will come in and several times, this is what they make you believe.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
there's no reason not to believe them.
Yeah.
They will come in and, so you're always kind of on your toes.
Yeah.
I guess you're always trying to pick who's the reviewer. Who,
Yeah.
It's that, there's two people, they're taking
Yeah.
lots of photos, they're taking lots of notes, is that them? And then they will confirm whether or not they think that a hat is, you're worthy of a hat.
Yeah.
And then they all sit down and they have a chat. Mm-hmm. And it's graded on a whole bunch of things. There was a breakdown a couple of years ago that Sydney Morning Herald did, but it's about food, it's about service, and they have this like one extra sort of little tiny categories like X factor. It's like if they walk in and like they can't put their finger on it, like the food is like so close and the service is exceptional, but the overall mark is like it's just shy. They're like, but this place has something else, and they'll give you that. They can sometimes like look at it and say, and this is what they've said. They call it the X factor. And they'll give you that.
Well, there you go. And what would you say to people that would comment more so that it's who you know, not so much what you're doing?
I actually don't disagree with that 100%. Like I think there's a whole lot of places in Canberra and Sydney that go under the radar. And I think what's been really good this year about the Good Food Guide Awards is that they don't just have hats, because hats traditionally were very much that like quiet, staid, like formal dining with like white tablecloths and all that kind of stuff. And when we got one at Rockford, a lot of people were kind of like, wow, a bar's getting, this is different.
Yeah.
Like that year there was quite a few places that were not the traditional kind of hatted restaurant style. I think there are, like, what they're doing this year though is having the hats, but they also have a bunch of like ones with just a love heart. And they're like, these might not be where we want them to be for a hat,
I think, yeah.
but they are still places that we would cross town for because they've got great dumplings or
Yeah.
they've great, great steak or whatever it is, but they're just not quite getting that
Hitting that mark.
15 out of 20 mark
Yeah.
that they need
Yeah.
to for a hat.
Yeah, right.
I think there's probably a few places that go off the radar. So whenever someone comes down and, that I know's in media, I'll be like, you should check this place out, you should check that place out. Not just because I'm trying to sort of do them a favor, but I'm like, there is actually some cool stuff behind the scenes that aren't like the big five kind of well-known ones, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's not to say that those places aren't deserving of hats, but there are a lot of places that go under the radar that I think deserve maybe not hats, but they deserve some kind of recognition for what they're doing.
The little guy.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
little guy maybe hidden. Yeah, well, I think, yeah, it's weird because like someone who's sort of taking hospitality a little bit more seriously personally, who is, thinking about where I want to sort of be in the future with my, with my own sort of place or sort of, or a different type of place in the future. And yeah, sometimes I really ask myself whether or not, if that should be something I should be holding of value so dearly and sort of aspiring to be. But I don't know. As I go on and as I sort of move through life and through hospitality and my thing, it's sort of my perception on it changes a little bit. I think coming into it originally, starting Kitta, 4 years ago, the hat was something I knew we were never really going to get, and I was never really achieving for it in this venue itself. But I always knew it was at this sort of sort of bigger than Ben Hur sort of accolade that if you had it, it's wow. But as I sort of get more intertwined with the industry, meeting people within the industry, sort of expanding my palette with what I think personally I find is what I like to enjoy. It sort of, sort of speaks to what I truly believe the biggest accolade of any sort of venue is, which is what you said before, having customers through the door and making sure you can pay your staff and pay your suppliers and making sure you can sort of, stay above water, every week, if not every night, and then make it to the next week and next night.
Yeah.
I think that's really important as well.
It makes it sound like an uphill battle, and many times it is.
Yeah.
But I think the hat is an amazing recognition of like a team effort, of a vision, all those kinds of things. And I'm huge, like I said, I'm hugely grateful for it. I don't want to sound like I'm ungrateful or spoiled or whatever, but like how to know, like bums on seats and sort of happy bums on seats.
Bums on seats.
Is the most important part, I think, of this kind of industry, because, I mean, we've seen so many places go down in the last couple of years with COVID, with staffing shortages, with whatever. It's just, it's like, I always thought that I'd be super happy if we just had this bustling little kind of local little restaurant in Kingston, and we just chugged along and made some good food, and people enjoyed it and had a good atmosphere, and they kept coming back. And we're getting lots of good regulars, and that's lovely. The hat is a really nice sort of icing on the cake thing.
Yeah.
Like I have sometimes to step back and go, wow, we had a pretty incredible first year. I'm pretty happy with where we've come out. At this stage, I'm definitely going to say it's worth it, but I'm going to need a rest at some point. So
Yeah, well, that just like, you know, obviously takes me to like, you know, your restaurant at the moment on Zoom in itself. And, you know, obviously, like I said before, congratulations for getting the hat. That's fantastic. And I would have to say hands down, you know, this is not sort of, you know, biased towards you or, you know, that they're friends or whatever, but I would have to say that personally, my feelings and my thoughts towards that restaurant are sort of exceptional. Whoever ever asks about wherever to go in Canberra, I always tell them you guys and some others, but of course Onzium. And, you know, I think it's just like this culmination of just things that, you know, we've talked about in the past that sort of makes a good restaurant. And I think it's sort of second to none. I think it's absolutely amazing. But
thank you.
Imagine if I've never been to Onzium, and sort of sometimes people ask me what it's like. In your words, you know, to describe it into what you believe that it is, what would you say to someone who has never sort of been to Onzium about what it's like and what you're trying to do?
Okay, I've always wanted to just be like a super fun place. It's relaxed, it's casual. Like we have some people complain, like customers complain that like they can't tell who works there and who doesn't because we don't have a uniform. I'm like, perfect, I love that. Like, I think that's a really nice...
That was the thing that my dad said about opening this place when I was like leaning towards not having uniforms, and then we ended up sort of fucking, you know, just saying like, yep, we can do grey shirts with the logo on it. And he went, every time I go to these places, sometimes I don't know who works there, who doesn't work there. I get confused.
Just point out that Jack's dad's a police officer, so uniform is like...
Oh, that's true.
Bleeds blue, man. Like I think for me, like having that relaxed kind of thing, but I think having staff that are kind of like they convey that level of confidence and they know their product and they know how to engage with customers, that's the most important part. Like, I mean, you don't want someone that's going to turn up in something that's like super grubby that they pulled off their floor closet type thing. But you like having those people comfortable and happy and being able to express their own identity when they're working is more important for me than this uniform type thing. So like a place where you can turn up, like for me, because we change the menu very, very frequently. It's based on what we can get from suppliers. I like the idea of a place where you could go once a week and have a completely different meal every single time because the menu is completely different. I love that concept. I love that idea. That's something I picked up when I was working with the guys in Paris. And I was just like, this is what cooking is. Like you get a box of ingredients and it's like ready, steady, cook every time. And I loved that. I really, really did. I guess what I enjoyed about the back streets of the 11th in Paris in cooking was how relaxed that vibe was. It was people spilling outside, smoking cigarettes and drinking wine, even though we don't condone cigarettes, and I'm 6 weeks clean, sick.
Congrats.
But
6 weeks?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not even wearing a patch today, far out.
Yeah.
But I think that super Parisian vibe was just, it was fun, it was inclusive, it was just, I don't know, it was a really nice, relaxed way to eat. And like yesterday, our first birthday party was the best sort of thing I'd seen during that. Like it was sunny, we had people and music out in the street, it was basically just a big street party. And I love that. And I love that we had so many locals and so many regulars coming through and a whole bunch of people who'd actually never been to the restaurant before. Like, oh, cool, let's just sit down and have a roll, some chips and a watermelon slushy. One of the things that I've been increasingly trying to sort of focus on for our cooking is that we're wood and charcoal kind of, and like really trying to focus on that stuff. We inherited a mad pizza oven. I've got a couple of little grills that we exclusively cook on during service. So that, like being one of Canberra's only 100% wood and charcoal fired restaurants, I'm really kind of proud of. It provides a few more challenges because you can't sort of just traditionally cook a piece of fish like this. There's a lot more a lot more intuition involved in cooking over fire and charcoal. It's a lot of fun. And it's like, in a way, you'd think it's kind of limiting in the flavors you can use, but it's also kind of liberating because you've got this, if you're cooking a piece of spatchcock, you're either grilling it or you're sort of putting in the wood-fired oven. You know the flavors you're going to get, but it's just like, with that, you can do anything you want because every culture throughout history has cooked over fire, directly or indirectly, and you can draw in so many different flavors and components and inspirations because every country does that. Every nation, every people, like in history have always cooked over fire in one degree, and you can do something quite rustic and elevated, and that's what I love. Like taking that super simple ingredient, and this translates to the wine as well. Like we really focus on the minimal intervention, kind of lo-fi stuff. Not everyone goes for that. Some people, I think, trying to educate people about natural wine as well, and understanding that it's not just about cloudy stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of the wine they drink at home anyway would fall into the same category. It has a very traditional extraction and traditional expression of grape. It's just gone through a different kind of process, if that makes sense. So that minimal intervention when it comes to ingredients from the cooking, like we get a piece of spatchcock, we're not going to, turn it into a mousse or a foam or something like that. We want to just cook it as a lovely ingredient by itself, the freshest vegetables we can get, the best seafood we can get, and just not overthink and over process something. We just want to put really nice ingredients on the plate for people to enjoy, and really nice sort of minimal intervention kind of wines in the glass for people to enjoy with that food too. So I think it's relaxed, it's inclusive, it's like, it's a fun vibe. That's I think the main thing. I know that was not one sentence.
No, I think and yeah, like I said before, the place is absolutely amazing. I remember talking to you about this a little while ago, and I think you summed it up perfectly then as well. And you said that it's a space and a venue where you can just rock up on the night because you went home after a long day and you didn't want to fucking cook, and you just didn't want to, you just didn't want to do it, and you can go to Onzium and not spend, an arm and a leg and have a good amount of food at good quality and enjoy yourself. Or you could, celebrate your 50th anniversary there. And there's that. A lot of places can't facilitate both vibes, and I think that's something that's really special as well.
Yeah, I think there's managing expectations in there as well. Like we often get people like, oh, can we have a quiet corner? We're very hard of hearing, or we want to book out for 20 people, and we're like, there are some things we can't accommodate. And if people come in and then say, hey, this is what we need for our dining experience, we're like, look, just as a heads up, if you're having a 70th birthday party, you probably don't want to book at 8:30 on a Saturday night, because that's when we're the most raucous. Like I would strongly recommend coming in on a Wednesday or Thursday when it's a bit quieter, or if you'd like to, book at 6 o'clock, because people aren't sort of kicking back as much at, say, 8:30, as they are at 8:30. So like, I think managing expectations, and I think we've had this conversation many, many times about managing customer expectations when they're at the door, when they're making a booking, about what their experience is going to be like. You have to often say, like, look, guys, it's going to be a 20-minute wait. I'm really sorry. And are they going to say, no, we're off. I'll see you later. But rather than saying, like, I'll just be 2 minutes, it's 2 minutes, and then 20 minutes later, then they're going to crack the shit. Like, making those conscious decisions about making sure that the people that come through the restaurant know what they're up for, know what they're in for, and know that, like, it's like, if this isn't a place for you, I get that. We really want it to be. But we just want to make sure you know what you're coming in for. And
I think that's really important. I think that's sometimes like quite forgotten in terms of the customer perspective of, they want a certain thing to be a certain way that they think that they're paying for. But even, as a business itself, or, being the one creating the experience, you want the experience to be exactly how you want it to be, and not sort of being jeopardized by anyone's expectations, and sort of like a bit of a meeting point, and a sort of this agreement that you have with this sort of customer,
we
invisibly
get that,
almost, and that's the type of customers that you kind of want within your business as well.
Totally, like people, like we're getting heaps of people down from Sydney, and for some reason, like Sydney people just, by and large, they're just like, wow, this place is great. Because of a certain age and demographic, whereas in Canberra, there's a lot of people of that same age and demographic, which we won't specify, which kind of want, like, oh, this is my local restaurant, why can't I BYO? And it's just like, because we can't afford to stay open if you BYO.
And I think that's something that's really special from, a business owner perspective, or someone who runs that thing, who's so obsessive and passionate about those things, is what, in my opinion, takes a good restaurant to a great restaurant, or a good place to a great place, when you're sort of facilitating what you want exactly to be done and give to the customers what, you're wanting to give them. Like even here, for example, like I kind of compare this place, whether or not it's toxic or not, as my home. So when people come in here and they want to sort of, sit down and have our food and have our drinks and stuff like that, you're coming into my space and my home, and I'm here to give you what I'm wanting to give you. And it comes down to like, even sometimes like we make a joke about it here about like, we're pretty big on just obviously filling people's waters up and filling people's glasses up, to the point where like, if they are somehow able to get to this water bottle before me and fill up their own glass, like that irritates me to my core.
I feel you.
And that's something that, it really bugs me and really gets to me. But then again, you dial back and you sort of, you want it. But it's just fascinating to think that these expectations sometimes, like some customers, are just so out there. But no, I think the way that you summed up on Zoom before, I couldn't.
Sorry, it was a bit long.
No, it's okay. And what can we expect in the future for the place? Like, and have you hit that vision that you sort of since then?
I've got to be honest. Like the vision of OnZM has changed and adapted as we've gone along. We opened during COVID. Well, we opened 2 weeks. We were supposed to open 2 weeks after the big lockdown last year. So August 2021. We were supposed to open September 2021. And then they announced lockdown. So we had to delay by like 6 weeks. But in doing so, it allowed us to look at a few things a bit differently. Like we hadn't quite thought about using downstairs at that point. That was just a down the track future project. But they only allowed us to have 10 people sitting upstairs, for example. So we, in 2 weeks, renovated the entire downstairs space to use it as spillover dining area, which was awesome because it was still not ideal for what we wanted it to be in the longer term, but it gave us an idea of what we needed to do. It gave us extra dining space, and it got like 80% of the work done that we needed to get done for that room to start operating. So we opened downstairs 6 months before we initially anticipated doing that. Outside, we didn't really know what we were going to be doing there, offering-wise. I didn't think about how much of the food was going to be wood and charcoal fired, and that's something that's changed and adapted as we've gone. I was never a cocktail drinker, for example. I was not a big cocktail drinker. I thought downstairs was just going to be full-on wine. Yeah. And then when Brett came along and Brett started talking about what he wanted to do with cocktails and started making shit, I was like, you know what? You can do whatever the fuck you want. Like, you're amazing, and I love all of his cocktails. They're fantastic. And I was like, you want to turn that into a cocktail bar? Go for it. Like, I never wanted to own a cocktail bar, but I'm glad I do. Yeah. Look, next year, I think I want to shift and change it a little bit. I want to expand our wine list a little bit more, and Tom and I are working on that together about expanding the offering, giving some of the more, like a bigger range, but also some of the higher end range stuff that when you go to Sydney and Melbourne, you're like, yeah, crap, that stuff's awesome. And cool. I want to revisit the food a little bit more. I want to refine a little bit, maybe give different offerings downstairs, upstairs is what I'm looking at. Like downstairs, more of that kind of bar food, finger food. Upstairs, kind of elevate it next year is what I'm hoping for. That's what we're going to work towards. Just going to read some books over summer.
Wow. Cool. All right. Interesting. Well, thinking back now about sort of everything we sort of talked about today, reflecting back on your personal experience and your history with this and with that and everything that you've been through, I ask you now, would you have skipped working in the office and gone straight to the kitchen?
No.
Knowing now what you know then? Or was it sort of things that you needed to learn?
No, I think I needed to learn from both like life and like study was an incredibly important part of my life, like going to uni. I know that I wouldn't, if I'd have started cooking back then, before I saw what cooking could be, I wouldn't be cooking now. I would have left the industry, as so many young people are, because of shit pay, shit conditions, and unfulfilling work. I think it wasn't until I was old enough to realize what I want to do with a little bit more maturity. I'll be like, yeah, cool, I want to do this, as opposed to being a 16-year-old kid that's like, yeah, I'll get a cooking degree. That's easy. I'll do that. And then 10 years later, they're like, my life sucks. And then they quit, which is what happens to so many guys. Like I had a young guy, really talented chef, retrained to be a sparky. And now he's like seeing his girlfriend more, he's spending heaps more money, and he's got a much better work-life balance. And like, that's great. Like, I'm really stoked for him. If I'd have done that, and like, I probably would have done the same thing. I probably would have left cooking very, very quickly. And there was so many important work and life experiences I picked up from working in an office. I think if I could have left earlier, and made that decision and had that realization earlier, I might have enjoyed cooking a little bit more. But at the same time, I think there's this weird confluence of having met my partner who really pushed me and encouraged me to do this was perfect timing. It was serendipitous in a way that like I was struggling with my job. If I'd have left it when I was like at the verge of like, oh, I've just done a master's, I'm going to take the next step in my public service career. If I hadn't done that, but also realized like I enjoyed it and I sort of don't regret it for a second, if I'd have jumped ship before that, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to go through those things, realize I didn't want to be there, and I wouldn't have met my partner, who is probably the main reason I cook. Like she encouraged me and challenges me and is my harshest critic, which is really, really hard sometimes because like I'm like, yeah, cool, this steak's awesome, and she's like, yeah, that sucks. I'm like, oh, fuck. But yeah, I think I would not be cooking if not for her. So I think honestly, I wouldn't have changed anything.
Yeah,
like there's some pretty dark chapters in the last 15 years, but I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now if not for some pretty specific sequencing of events, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Sounds a bit weird, but...
No, I think that is beautifully summed up. Louis, that's all I really wanted to cover too much today. Thank you so much for spending the time, and thank you for everyone behind the scenes. Thanks, Burrows. Thanks, Warif and Barakat. Thanks, Gracie, for coming together and putting this all together. What do I want to do? Who I really inspired by is this guy named Stephen Bartlett. And originally with all of his podcasts back in the day, he'd always end off his podcast or his episodes with some sort of like fun question and whatever. This is pretty much taken right from his book.
Okay.
But I kind of made it in hospitality, InBirks style.
All right.
What 4 people would you invite to dinner and why? And what venue would you go to in Canberra?
In Canberra.
Venue does include yourself or your home or your own
Honestly,
cooking.
without blowing smoke or making it sound like blowing smoke, I'd bring him here because this place is the time and the place for 4 a.m. conversations.
Yeah.
Sitting right here, I'd actually make him play Cards Against Humanity. That really is going to show what they're like.
Yeah.
That would be loose. 4 people, far out.
I don't know if you could play Cards Against Humanity against someone who's funnier than the cards. Like he's, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I reckon he'd be darker. He'd probably have his own better answers.
Yeah.
God, that's hard.
Yeah.
Okay. I've always wanted to meet David Attenborough. I reckon he'd be incredible to sit down and talk to. Like that guy's life, far out. Like he's seen some shit. Like
he's pretty old now as well, isn't he?
Yeah. I think he's getting on. Trying to
There's
think.
one.
Yeah, there's one. I remember there was a competition a long time ago. It's like if you answered this question or did something, you could meet your idol and whatever. And I was always thinking like I would enter that just so I could ask if I could play basketball with Barack Obama.
Yeah.
Because I reckon that'd be sick. Like he'd wipe the floor with anyone.
Yeah.
But I reckon he'd be mad.
Okay.
Attenborough, Obama. Oh God. Put me on the spot. There's like as soon as I walk out the front door, I'm gonna have like 100 people.
About so many
right?
people. Your girlfriend's gonna be like, "Oh, why didn't you say me?"
Yeah. No, we talk all the time. She'd get it. Who else would I bring? You're gonna have to do so much editing on this because there's gonna be so much thinking time, bro. What kind of categories do most people come up with for this?
I don't know.
I feel like there's got to be
family. You know, would you want a significant other of yours to have conversations with Barack Obama as well?
I hadn't thought about it like that. No, I'm keeping this for me.
Done. I'll keep it.
Trying to think who else. There has to be someone in there food related, right? I just can't think who that would be.
Action Bronson.
Potentially, I reckon.
Yeah.
He'd become actually. You know what? I reckon I'd go. Have you seen The Bear? Have you guys seen The Bear?
No, but I've been wanting to watch that. It looks really cool.
It is triggering.
Okay. You can say a character
triggering.
if you want to meet that
Actually,
guy.
I wouldn't mind. Sounds super lame, but the actor that plays him, I'd like to pick his brain and figure out how did you get to this? Because it is such an accurate portrayal of so many chefs and life in kitchens.
We need
and
to watch that.
restaurants.
So I told you to watch it.
It's amazing.
That's three. One
That's
more.
3.
Isn't these videos of Action Bronson like drinking olive oil straight out of the bottle?
No.
It's,
Well,
I didn't even know you could do that.
The reason I said that is Manny Matheson is actually the consultant
Yeah.
for that show, and he
Yep.
plays an extra.
Yeah.
And he actually, I don't know, something about Action Bronson is super aggro. And actually, I don't know her name, but you know she's the Korean nun in Netflix, the Chef's Table Netflix.
Oh.
It's like, I'm not a massive fan of Netflix, so
Yeah.
I feel like it glorifies a whole bunch of like really
Yeah.
toxic fuckwit male
Yeah,
chefs.
I know it's true. Yeah.
But there's this Korean nun who works in like a temple, a Buddhist temple, and like just where she works and lives. But she's also the cook, and the food she puts up is so delicate and considered, and I don't know. There's just something so gentle and calming about watching her. Huh?
Damn, I was
Yeah, that's
2
right.
seconds away from it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hyung Kwan.
She is amazing. Like,
Okay, cool.
I reckon her, just because I think you'd have probably some pretty big personalities.
Yeah.
I feel like the actor one was kind of lame, but Jung Kwan 100%. Like,
No, that's cool. It's interesting. All right.
yeah.
Well,
totally.
no. And here.
Yeah, because
Just
because whenever I'm here, it's always after midnight.
Yeah.
Everyone's always like not like intoxicated, but inhibitions are a little bit down because it's late, it's tired.
Yeah.
Everyone's had a long
bit
day.
more vulnerable, you know?
Everyone's
Yeah.
like, I reckon it's a good place to talk, especially on this table. It's a good talking table.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you again.
Thanks for having me, bro. Come here. I'm glad I took part of it. Always do that.
Lovely.